I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. In the list of President Trump's executive orders, one puzzler stands out for its outsized news coverage and small impact: plastic straws. The executive order removes paper straws from federal buildings and makes some general claims about how plastic straws are better. The president has the bully pulpit, and some Americans have rejoiced at the return of plastic straws. But in reality, the executive order does not have broader impact through EPA rules or a potential law to be passed by Congress. It does not direct state and local governments to return to plastic straws. Trump's executive orders encouraging carbon producing fossil fuel use will do far greater damage. As the federal government retreats on environmental protection generally, one area where state and local governments can and have stepped up is plastic pollution. Since Washington, D.C. area jurisdictions began banning plastic straws and taxing plastic bags, trash traps, which are like samples of the larger problem, have seen dramatically fewer bags and straws. I caught up with Trey Sherrod of Anacostia Riverkeeper, the nonprofit that works to clean up the river and its tributaries flowing through Montgomery and Prince George's counties and on the east side of Washington, D.C. The case may be lost at the federal level for now, but are state and local governments better suited to fighting plastic pollution anyway? Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, especially when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Cat Scan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass and vocals, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. Their latest album, reflecting the time and this cultural moment, is called Everything is Normal. To feel better, go see them live. You can find out where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. If you have difficulty finding them, we share their events on I Hate Politics socials. Trey Sherrod, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Morning. It's nice to be here.
Over a decade now, we have tried to control plastic in the waterways in and around Washington, D.C. Several jurisdictions have put on taxes on plastic bags, and that seems to have reduced the number of bags that you are finding in trash traps and other litter cleanups. But we have tackled this problem item by item, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and it seems like a long, long process. Isn't there a way to do this in comprehensive fashion, in a way that actually, brings everyone together, sets the standard, and then the rest of it is enforcement and implementation rather than legislation every session?
We almost had a comprehensive approach. And then it was the last bill I remember being introduced to the federal Congress before the pandemic hit with COVID. That bill was the Breaking Free from Plastic Pollution Reduction Act of 2020. And then It was reintroduced to the next Congress. I believe it was reintroduced a third time. That bill was magnificent. It connected plastic, trash, and litter in our communities and in our streams and rivers with what it's made out of, which is oil and fracked gas. And it connected the risks to frontline communities from refining towns and extraction towns with other communities, also usually environmental justice communities, bearing the brunt of the litter and the trash like we see in DC, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. That bill was beautiful, and it was too beautiful to succeed with any Congress we've had in a while. And that would have been federal, and that would have caught everything up. That would have, at the national level for the entire United States, put a 10-cent fee for deposit on all beverage containers. It would have banned nationwide the use of a lot of single-use plastics like styrofoam takeout containers, plastic bags, plastic forks, all the little things that we've had to deal with jurisdiction by jurisdiction instead. In the meantime, forward-thinking jurisdictions like the district have led, right, nationally and in some cases even globally with the bag fee. So the 5-cent bag fee in DC was one of the first. I think it's 14 or 15 years old at this point this year. Not only does it reduce the number of bags we see in the environment significantly, it also creates a funding stream for other environmental work. So a lot of the free boat tours that we give through Anacostia River Explorers, that's funded by DOEE with money from the bag fee.
DOEE stands for the Department of Energy and Environment in the DC government. Back to Trey shared.
The trash traps and the maintenance of the trash traps that we run in the district, that's funded with money from the bag fee. It goes into a variety of trash capture, trash volunteer cleanups, education about trash, all kinds of things. So that bill has been a rock star locally, and it's become sort of a model regionally. Montgomery County picked that up very quickly. Now Montgomery County has just issued a ban on plastic bags and a heavier fee on paper crate. That mirrors what Prince George's County moved into. But it's item by item and jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And as you noted on your last news bit, a unanimously passed bill for the ban on plastic bags in Montgomery County is still catching a bunch of pushback suddenly after a unanimous vote in favor. So these things, as small as they are, can still be really contentious. There is a different model which has been proposed in a Senate bill that was just heard a couple days ago for the Maryland State Senate. Maryland State Senator Malcolm Augustine has an extended producer responsibility bill for packaging. You're going to hear EPR tossed around pretty often. That is to address all the packaging, right? So that's the cardboard box around cereal. That's the bag inside the cardboard box. It's the nasty little hard plastic container around your batteries. You pick a piece of packaging for like a retail item, and it's supposed to address all of that. And that is awesome. It's also complicated, and it can take a really long time to actually implement. I think as of the hearing Tuesday, maybe two other states in the United States right now have similar bills enacted, and I'm not sure if either of them have actually taken full effect yet. I don't believe that we've seen the actual full on-the-ground effort to implement an extended producer responsibility bill for all packaging. One of the problems with that bill, and I hope it's something that Augustine will amend, is that it doesn't have a cutout in it to make sure that it explicitly plays nicely with a beverage container deposit and refund system. I think it's Maine that has the packaging-wide EPR bill, and it was brought into play. It was enacted to fit around a pre-existing beverage container deposit and refund system. So in that case, that kind of language is the sort of amendment we would want to see Augustine get into his proposal in the Maryland General Assembly, because they can coexist really nicely. And whereas it's really complicated to handle 20 plus different material streams, 10 states out of 50 have had a beverage container bill for most of them half a century or longer. And that's well understood. We know that those states meet their waste diversion targets, right? Maryland, excellent goals for waste diversion, nowhere near meeting any of them. We see the same thing here in DC. So those 10 states that have it, we know it works well there. The data is pretty clear. From our trash cleanups and trash trap work, we know that about half of all the litter we're picking up off the ground and out of the creek is some kind of beverage container, be it a glass bottle, an aluminum can, or public enemy number one, plastic bottles.
The bottle recycling system that you're talking about, that is a system that gives those who collect bottles a small payment per bottle. Is that the system that you're talking about?
It's better to think of it as the consumer has paid their 5 or 10 cents at the store, and then they get that money back refunded to them when they redeem that bottle to recycle it. If somebody doesn't care about that 10 cents and they just throw it in their curbside recycling, that's not going to be gone, right? They don't have to take it back to the store if they don't want their 10 cents back. They can just throw it in the bin. If it stays in the bin, then that unredeemed deposit goes to the state, and it will help fund other projects, right? So improving recycling of something else locally. It will help fund some kind of recycling education project, right, for a school. Or if someone litters that beverage container, any unhoused person, a kid, they can come in and pick up that bottle, and that bottle is now money for them. My mom, when she was growing up on the beach in North Carolina, this is before any law about how to recycle bottles and cans. The practice of the industry was to simply do a redemption because it was cheaper to pay that redemption and get an entire bottle back. We're talking mostly glass bottles at this point, and they would just be washed out and reused. It's exactly like the end goal of what we could have now, that we would like to see an actual reuse model, right? And they did that because it was the smart way to do business. And then we saw plastic come in. And then we were told that we deserve more convenience in our lives. And then we were sold a bill of goods about single stream recycling and plastics recycling in particular. And the American public bit on that. And now we are where we are, where it turns out most plastics recycling is just a farce. A plastic bottle in Maryland is never, ever, ever going to be a plastic bottle again. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. A plastic bottle in Massachusetts or California or Iowa, my personal favorite state that has a bottle bill already. In those bottle bill states, a bottle can become a bottle again. But in Maryland and in DC and in the rest of the country right now, a plastic bottle is assumed to be contaminated in the recycling process because of all the other things that end in a single stream recycling bin. It would only take one bottle of pesticide, right, to contaminate all of that material. And so in Maryland and in DC, if that plastic bottle is recycled, it's going to be downcycled pretty severely. It's going to become part of like a track. It's going to become part of like synthetic decking, like tracks. It's never, ever going to be a food container again. And right now that's on purpose because of concerns about contamination. In the hearing, we heard a lot about contamination as a reason why this kind of thing is scary. But again, there are 10 states that have had this sort of bottle deposit and refund system for half a century, and they don't see those problems. In fact, those 10 states contribute the majority of recycled plastic that goes back into bottles in the United States.
The metal cans that we buy for as beverage containers, those are obviously now worth recycling, collecting, and selling. There doesn't seem to be any systematic way in which individuals, for instance, could do this. A kid could do this, for instance. There's no place to do that. So that's a barrier. But there is money in aluminum cans, and it's going to be even more profitable to do that in the coming days with the new tariffs on aluminum and on metals. And the glass is, not kind of very useful anymore. And plastic, we almost do not recycle. So even in Maryland, when you say that something becomes decking, it's not really most of the plastics in Montgomery County, for instance, is just being incinerated at the Dickerson incinerator or being sent south or overseas somewhere. Because once China stopped buying all the plastic in, 2015, there hasn't been a real market in recycled plastic. So the thing that I'm wondering about is whether there is an intention to create some cross subsidy between metal cans and plastic bottle that cost to recycle. And metal cans you can profit from recycling, right? Is there
Okay, I see where you're going. There's a lot of things I want to hit on that. First, I do want to hit the fact that you mentioned that a lot of our recycling gets sent abroad. When you see statistics about like Southeast Asia and which rivers have the most plastic, it is really critical for American audiences to know that a lot of that is their plastic that they set into single stream recycling. Right. We actually export trash and plastic worldwide. I am personally offended, right, that a plastic bottle I might have used in a moment of weakness travels better than I do. Right. That hurts me a little bit. I can't afford a trip right now to Southeast Asia. I would love to. Right. But my trash is getting sent over there without me. And that's a point that I don't think we can hit that enough. I don't think many people in the American audience understand how we export trash and recycling materials. Another thing that I wanted to hit on was your direct question about whether or not metals recycling can balance what is currently a negative value to plastics recycling. In a state that has a bottle deposit and return system, plastic bottles no longer cost to recycle. So by virtue of keeping them separate, right, and only being with beverage containers, all of those values skyrocket.
I don't understand. How?
Glass is a really good example. When glass bottles in Montgomery County and Prince George's County and DC ideally get thrown into a single stream recycling can, eventually they break. And as they break, they are surrounded by other single stream recycling materials like paper. The glass shreds the paper wraps the glass, everything gets wet, everything becomes hard to separate later. You get these like little paper encrusted glass nuggets, right? And now it's no longer cost effective to separate those two materials. Much better to send it to the incinerator, burn off the paper, and the glass is used to cover up all the ash. And that's what happens right now in most cases. If in Montgomery County or one of the jurisdictions in Virginia, you take your glass to a separate drop-off, that glass bottle is only going to hang out with glass bottles, and it's going to stay glass. It's going to maintain a much higher value.
There is discussion about single stream recycling versus separated recycling. The only way that you can benefit from separation is if you have certain kinds of laws in place that allow recycling to occur. If you're not really recycling, if there is no requirement to recycle, then maybe you should just combine everything and put it together. Is that what the issue is at this point where we can't figure it out? Because where Anacostia runs through is very liberal, very democratic, absolutely royal blue. And then
because half of all the trash we pick up, all the litter, is a beverage container, aluminum cans, glass bottles, and especially plastic bottles, you can literally cut the trash in half. And name me a single politician that doesn't want to make that claim when they go back to the public next election cycle. I helped cut trash on the streets in half, right? I helped cut trash in your parks in half. That is such a political opportunity. And the desire is there. And yet, in the process of lobbying and actually trying to get these bills through, we see that desire on the behalf of the public thwarted. And we see the politicals fail to get that opportunity under their belt.
Why is this happening?
There's a lot of money in politics in the United States, and a lot of that money comes from oil and gas. And it may not be the Petroleum Institute going to Maryland General Assembly to comment on this or that recycling bill, but it might be the American Chemistry Council, which is an organ of oil and gas industry and plastics refining industry. If we're actually successfully recycling plastic bottles into plastic bottles, we're not buying virgin plastic. And that's a problem for the oil and gas industry. So that would be the single biggest reason why we see that kind of money in this level of politics.
Can you identify that clearly? So yes, in theory, what you say is correct. The Petroleum Institute is allowed to lobby by our First Amendment. Are you really seeing the connection that you just talked about between that lobbying thwarting the will of the people?
In Maryland this session, I haven't seen American Chemistry Council. I haven't seen any other lobby group that I know to be directly related to plastics, oil, and gas. I have seen it in DC. And that's where that story comes from. In the debates for the foam ban, an American Chemistry Council representative came in and basically pointed at all of the environmentalists in the room and said we were all lying. And that was the extent of their argument against the foam ban at the time.
Even though in the Maryland General Assembly, they are not there is tension between Senator Augustine's bill that covers everything and the bottle bill that could get half the trash, according to you. But now the comprehensive bill could kill the bottle bill.
That's a big concern. So
even though there is not that lobbying, you still have that tension. So that tension exists beyond the lobbying.
I'll spin it differently. This is the third year in a row that we've pushed the beverage container recycling bill. In Maryland, the first year, the General Assembly decided that they should do a recycling needs assessment. If the point of the beverage container recycling was just to overhaul the recycling system, that would make sense. The point of the beverage container recycling system is to cut litter in half. We know that so much of our trash on the ground and in the creek is a beverage container. And we know that there is a model working already for decades in 10 other states, not to mention other countries. And they don't see that kind of problem where they have beverage container laws. So the first big, bold, shiny neon goal of this beverage container deposit and refund system is to cut litter. It will work very nicely, I think almost hand in hand, with other extended producer responsibility for packaging. You can actually think of the beverage container laws as one of the first by many decades, right? One of the oldest EPR bills in the country. It's one of the first times where consumers and legislators said, all right, you chose how to package this thing. You're going to pay for dealing with it. I bought the soda. I didn't buy the bottle. I don't have a choice about how you package it. That's your choice. And so you're going to deal with that. So there does not need to be tension between Senator Malcolm Augustine's EPR for packaging bill and Senator Brooks's beverage container deposit bill. That is a tension that is encouraged, I think, by different lobbying groups opposed to one or the other or both. That is a tension they would like to see exploited. And I think it's a very easy one to circumvent, right? We just need a little bit of language in the Augustine bill saying, and this will work well with a beverage container deposit system.
Who is encouraging that tension?
I don't know directly. It's something we've seen grow. A lot of the talking points about needing a study, right? That's a favorite industry diversion tactic. Oh, we need a study.
That's true for building transit
Everything.
and building new housing. And this is like a Jane Jacobs moment, gum up everything. It's not a illegitimate way of working. It's just the way that our system works. Did they do a needs assessment on recycling? And what did it show? Or did they not even bother with that?
3 years ago, they decided they needed the recycling needs assessment before doing anything else. And then they proceeded not to fund it. And so it slid, I think, an entire year is what happened. When they finally funded it, then still didn't get off the ground. I don't know why. As I understand it right now, as of the hearing 2 nights ago, I don't think the needs assessment report is done. I think it's close to done. It may be in the agency's hands and not the larger public's hands. Simultaneously, there was an extended producer responsibility for packaging work group or task force. I forget what name they gave it. And as of a week ago, I don't think they had a report ready. Apparently, that report got done in the very nick of time for the hearing 2 nights ago. I don't think it's come to public yet. I don't know how complete or incomplete a report that was. That is another factor in this.
The extended producer responsibility bills, they have to be at least at the state level, right? They become moot if you have them at the local level.
I've never heard of a local only one for something broad like packaging. So there are local ones. Well, DC is a weird example, right? Because it's local and state. They've got paint, they've got batteries. We heard other hearings or other bills in the same hearing 2 days ago talking about electronics and batteries and that kind of stuff for other EPR bills.
In that case, are other Chesapeake watershed states, such as Virginia or Delaware or Pennsylvania, are they working together? I would imagine that the Chesapeake Bay program would have a strong interest in this. Or is it the case that the bottles get stuck way ahead and don't actually get into the bay?
I don't know how much the Bay program is watching this particular kind of bill. I don't know how much their states committee works on this. I haven't heard much push from them on it, but I don't know how much they track it. To your question about do the bottles make it into the bay? Yeah, they absolutely do. Aluminum cans are already open, right? They don't have a lid. So they're neutrally buoyant on their own. As soon as they get a little dirty and they fill up with rainwater, they're sinking, right? They may bob up and down in that stream, but as soon as they get a little mud or a stick or something else in there, they're going to sink. Who knows how many cans on the bottom of all of our creeks and rivers? They are mobile on the bottom, right? They can keep rolling and get churned up by a big storm flow, but they're on the bottom. Glass bottles, if they're capped, will stay afloat for a really long time, right? Message in the bottle style. If they're uncapped, they are naturally heavy. And then once they fill up with water, they're really heavy. And so same thing, they're going to go down and become mobile, but on the bottom, right? So in our trash traps, because of the nature of our stormwater, everything gets churned up really violently when a rain does come because we have so much runoff happening all at once that we see heavy things like glass bottles and cans sitting on top of a raft of plastic bottles. But plastic bottles are number one problem, right, for trash, for litter. And because they float, they can go thousands of miles. There is actually some really cool research being done right now to try to track bottles.
Jay Shard, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.
What lessons should we draw from my conversation about the politics of plastic pollution with Trey Sherrod of the nonprofit Anacostia Riverkeeper? First, compare two types of environmental actions: cutting carbon emissions and reducing plastic pollution. As hard as it is to clean the Anacostia River, Trey Sherrod of Anacostia Riverkeeper, other environmentalists, and environmental groups have succeeded in some plastic pollution reduction. On carbon emission control, the United States just withdrew from international agreements. While emissions per dollar of economic output have been falling for decades, aggregate emissions continue to increase due to population growth and rising living standards. There are several reasons for this, but a fundamental one is that carbon emissions are global. Doesn't matter if they originate in Bangladesh or in Washington, D.C., same impact. But our primary tool for tackling societal problems, the government, is not global. Our governments are territorially demarcated entities. It is hardly surprising that these delimited entities can only solve global problems through voluntary collective action. And when we elect a president who does not believe in environmental protection, well, voluntary agreements fall apart. In contrast, ground and water pollution, including plastics, is a geographically delimited problem. That is not to say that plastic pollution does not occur globally, but rather we can see plastic bags, plastic straws, and plastic bottles in our neighborhoods, woods, streams, and in our rivers. Eventually, they will join the large garbage patches floating in the oceans, but they are right there in front of us now, or at least in low-income areas close to us. And there are governments who are responsible for these areas. So it is not surprising that trash traps are collecting fewer plastic straws and plastic bags as a consequence of government policy. Second, even with the success, the politics of plastic pollution is not simple. There is tension between a bottle buyback bill and a comprehensive all packaging bill that may sink legislative action in the Maryland General Assembly a third year in a row. At a time when many are wondering what to do, Maryland and DC residents at least can make a success out of tackling plastic pollution. Bottle buyback is not a new idea. Many states have it already. Lastly, Anacostia has been unswimmable for decades. Sewage and stormwater mix to make this waterway uninhabitable for fish and wildlife. This is changing. DC's investment in separating sewage and stormwater have dramatically reduced contaminants in the river, to the point where last year, 2024, DC organized an Anacostia swim event. It didn't happen eventually. A storm rolled by a few days prior, and the runoff increased bacteria to unsafe levels, and the event was called off. There is more work to be done, but fish and wildlife are back. On boat rides Sherrod organizes for DC school children, they are able to spot river otters, a harbinger of a cleaner Anacostia. Music for this episode comes from CatScan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C., Paul Chaparas on bass and vocals, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. Their latest album reflecting the time and this cultural moment is called Everything is Normal. To feel better, go see them live. You can find out where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. If you have difficulty finding them, we share their events on I Hate Politics socials. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.